Okay, well, we have people slowly trickling in, but we're going to go ahead and start out of respect for everybody's time. We're really excited to be hosting a conversation today on social innovation, entrepreneurship, and the digital divide in collaboration with our wonderful colleagues at ANDE, which you will learn a lot more about shortly. To kick us off, I will go over the agenda. We're going to start by having a quick fireside chat to talk a little bit more about digital equity at the intersection of entrepreneurship. What does that mean? It's going to set the tone for the rest of the discussion, which will deep dive into a more thorough understanding around the entrepreneurial ecosystem and the impact on social development, specifically the Sustainable Development Goals and other social and economic development objectives. And feel free to use the chat box throughout this to ask us questions. There's a Q&A feature. Ask your questions in there, and we'll try to get to those towards the end of the discussion. But do use the Q&A feature to ask us questions, and we will also be sending resources out on the chat box, so please do keep your eye out for that. To give you a really quick overview, this webinar is part of our digital innovation and social innovation series that really looks to highlight the role of digital equity in the larger social impact ecosystem. Digital inclusion and digital equity are often buzzwords that you hear thrown around, and we're going to unpack why they are not only more than buzzwords, but the critical role that digital inclusion plays in helping us actually achieve the Sustainable Development Agenda and then also other development objectives, which we'll unpack throughout this conversation. A quick introduction to the Digital Equity Accelerator, which is one of the organizers of this webinar. We are an incubator for nonprofit organizations that are really looking at creating progress on social and economic development challenges, specifically through the lenses of digital inclusion and digital equity. This is our second year, and we're very proud to say that we have thus far invested into 17 organizations, helping expand their cumulative reach and impact, but also really helping them think through how to sustain and grow and develop their work and output. For the purposes of this conversation, we define digital equity as not just kind of something that we hear about, oh, it's great to have connections to the internet or access to mobile phones, but we truly believe that without digital equity and digital inclusion, we limit people's abilities to have full and meaningful engagement in their societies, and thus we limit our ability globally to actually achieve social and economic development objectives and goals. And that's a lot of what we're going to unpack here today. To quickly introduce myself, my name is Hazami Barmada, and I'm director of the Digital Equity Accelerator, but I come to this space from an international development background primarily, and I am extremely honored to be here today and have a fireside chat and then hand over the reins to her to very wonderfully moderate the rest of the conversation. But I'm happy to be joined by Rashenda Van Leeuwen, who is the executive director of the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs, also known as ANDE. And Rashenda has such a diverse and wonderful, colorful background and experience in executive management and international development. And I will have her actually talk to you more about the wonderful work that ANDE is doing. And without further ado, I'm going to actually dive straight into that. So welcome, Rashenda.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, I'm going to kick off by asking you to introduce our audience to ANDE, and maybe those that are not as aware. What does it do?
So ANDE, so as you mentioned, the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs is a 14-year program of the Aspen Institute that was set up in 2009. So next year we'll be celebrating our 15th year of this work, and structured as a membership network of intermediaries, and you'll be meeting some of them shortly in the next phase of the conversation, that are focusing on helping to support small businesses in their growth and their development, and really looking at things holistically from an ecosystem, an entrepreneurial ecosystem, helping really entrepreneurs to be able to succeed in their local communities and their local context. And part of that has been very much looking at overcoming some of the barriers to growth for small businesses, whether it's access to capital, whether it's access to markets, whether it's the type of support that they need, whether it's from incubation when they're just starting out, or acceleration in helping them to access financing to be able to grow. So today we're a network of between 200 and 300 intermediaries around the world. And today you'll be hearing from colleagues from TechnoServe that's really operating globally, as well as colleagues from ProMujer and Fundación Capital who work in the Americas. And they'll be talking more about their work in their specific country and context. But this group is a very vibrant network that comes together and really focusing on what do we need? What do we need to do to continue to address barriers for small businesses, whether for male entrepreneurs, whether for female entrepreneurs, but for women entrepreneurs particularly, there have been a lot of systemic issues which mean that they don't really have the opportunity necessarily to grow and optimize their ability to contribute to local social and economic development. So over the years, we've really been focusing in a number of different areas. Access to capital does remain a challenging one in the sector. We call it the missing middle, of really looking at the access to finance that's available to these small businesses. And why is this important? Well, small businesses actually constitute 90% of the world's business sector. So when we talk about private sector, often we think about Google and Walmart and these massive companies, but actually most businesses are small businesses. So if they don't have the opportunity really to be able to grow and meet their optimize their ability to grow, then we're actually missing out as a society. So we're all really very much focused on how do we help to overcome those barriers? How do we help to support those entrepreneurs? I mean, my ultimate vision is that you could be an entrepreneur anywhere in the world and have access to the business support and access to capital to help you grow your business wherever you are. And even today, we're still a long way from that, and we're working to address it, however, and it's great to have so many members that we work with on a daily basis to realize that vision in their own context. We're also very much focusing on small businesses as an engine for economic development, and particularly for jobs. In some societies, we have very, very high levels of unemployment, and particularly in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, as much as 50% youth unemployment. And so entrepreneurship actually is one vehicle through which we can also help to create new jobs, decent jobs, and particularly as businesses formalize as they grow, then they're creating better jobs as well for their local societies. So that's a key area of focus for us as well. And then I'll just finish by saying that the third area that we're focusing on, particularly at ANDE, is also climate action. So we're really also looking at how can entrepreneurship within the small business sector across so many societies help us with building resilience to climate change, help us with addressing some of the challenges or through the ability to provide products and services through what we call green entrepreneurship that are really helping to either decarbonize or address environmental challenges in those societies.
Roshenda, I want to unpack this a bit more because a lot of the work that you're talking about, which is part of how this webinar came about, in engaging between both of our initiatives, it became clear that digitization is something that we keep hearing about. The idea that our economy and our world is going more digitized. Now, what does that mean? What are the impacts to the business sector, but what are also the impacts to entrepreneurs themselves in the products that they create? So I'd like to ask you to maybe unpack from your perspective why digital equity and digital inclusion is so important in the entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Yeah, it's important on two fronts. First of all, we just went through a pandemic that helped us recognize that we all had to pivot almost overnight to being digital. I'm sorry, my video seems to have gone off, but from being offering services in person to having to pivot to digital. So one of the things that we saw was pre-pandemic, many of our members were offering their services. About 24% of them were offering digital services before the pandemic. And then by the end of 2020, about 75% of them were offering digital services. So it's not only that it's important for the businesses themselves, but it's also important for those organizations, and you'll hear some examples shortly, that are offering those services to the entrepreneurs. So we found that, when we used to have meetings in person, now, it had to be online. And in a way, this really pushed the sector forward, I would say, by a number of years, because it was already going in that direction, but then it was a forcing mechanism. And now we see through surveying that we've done, that it's about 62% of services, something like that are offered digital. So in person can be still very much important, very important. But for the entrepreneurs themselves, we live in a digital world now. So so much business is being done digitally that you are losing out in your society if you don't have access to the tools that can be helping you either gain an advantage, or if you don't have a digital marketplace, then you may be losing a large proportion of your customer base. If you're not utilizing tools in your business, then particularly just basic digital financial tools, then it's very, very hard for you as a small entrepreneur to be able to, for example, be aware of your cash flow. And cash flow management is a huge issue that we've seen through micro enterprises as well as small businesses. So there's so many digital products out there now, but the entrepreneurs may not know which ones are the right ones to use or which ones are affordable. And so it's helpful for them to be able to look and see, what's available and what's appropriate to their business, which is where our members come in as well, particularly in helping guide those entrepreneurs in their own digital journeys. And some of them, it's going to be, that their actual product is a digital product. They are an online business, whereas other ones, it's really that they're offering more of a business or a product or service that is not online, but they need to utilize that digital solution base in order to be able to optimize their business. And I will say as well, because I couldn't resist saying it, having been very much in that world, we also still have many, many people who don't have access to electricity. So that digital world is, if not completely out of reach, it's very difficult for them. So it would be digital through a cell phone. And if you don't have a smartphone, then again, it's very difficult for you to be able to take full advantage of what's on offer digitally. And we still today, although we've made great strides on that, in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, there's still about 650 million people who don't have even basic access to electricity. So there's a digital divide, but there's also that power divide that then exacerbates the digital inclusion piece as well.
Well, that brings me to a question. I mean, this year, 2023, marks the halfway point for the Sustainable Development Goals. As everyone knows, in 2015, we launched, as a global community, this very ambitious roadmap to development. We are at the halfway point, and unfortunately, also due to COVID setbacks, we are realizing that we are not halfway to achieving some of these goals outlined in the Sustainable Development Agenda. I want to ask you specifically if we can kind of tackle the role of the digital divide. You mentioned exacerbating inequalities, but also what is the role of the digital divide in preventing us from maybe even achieving the Sustainable Development Goals if it isn't centered across the Sustainable Development Agenda?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, because I think, as we said, the world is moving more digitally. There's so much that you can do. Sometimes it's even with data management and being able to measure what is needed. So using, again, an example from my work in the renewable energy space, which contributes to Sustainable Development Goal 7 and 13, we actually now have sensors that you can put to be able to assess what are some of the power needs, or how is the power working, in a way that we didn't 10 years ago. And those have actually been developed by small businesses. So there's a great one such business is one called Smart Meter that puts meters on grids and to help look at how the power is flowing. Now, why is that important? Because the small businesses need to be able to access that. They need to be able to gauge what their needs are. They can also see how much it's costing them, what's cost effective, where they could be more energy efficient. And providing that data is just exceptionally important in helping us to really see how we can focus and where we can focus. Another example in the financial services sector is being able to use large data sets in order to be able to look at credit ratings in sub-Saharan Africa for solar and other renewable energy entrepreneurs, and see who should actually be getting the access to the capital. And there's another early company called Nithio that's really been looking at utilizing data in a way to be able to provide a credit scoring for companies, small businesses, to then be able to look at what their financing needs are, and these are, and then being able to direct investors to support those companies. So these are all examples of how digital is supporting us in different aspects of the achievement of the SDGs. And I could say the same in the health sector or in education or so many sectors. So I think the answer really in short is that you can't look today at being able to achieve the SDGs without digital. So whether it's digitization of the small businesses or just digital products and services that they can use, as well as that support base that I mentioned through all of the intermediary organizations that help those businesses succeed, we have to be able to utilize different types of digital solutions.
And you bring up a really important point, which is also the role of entrepreneurs and nonprofits in the case, for example, of our Digital Equity Accelerator, that are actually solving for this digital divide. They are stopgapping what ordinarily people would think is traditionally responsibility of large corporations, telecommunications companies, and governments. And you're seeing increasingly small to medium enterprises that are starting to create solutions in these spaces, whether it's mobile apps for accessibility, whether it's healthcare solutions through mobile clinics. In our accelerator cohort, we have folks that are using WhatsApp chatbots, for example, for educational and curriculum tools. There's a lot of innovation happening in the digital equity space and the digital inclusion space also. I'd like to ask you what your perspective is on the role of entrepreneurs in actually solving for some of these very structural, systemic inequities that we see in the international development sector.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think one of the advantages of small businesses is that they can they're not behemoths. They can be agile, they can be innovative, and they can bring new solutions to bear. Whether it's at the local community, or often if they can scale, which is what we're really focusing on, then it can actually be at a national or international level as well. So I do remind people that even Amazon.com started out as a small business in somebody's garage. So it's really looking and not constraining their growth, and really being able to provide those flexible solutions, as you say, that are well tailored to their local context as well. And again, I don't want to sort of preempt the panel discussion, but you will be hearing examples of that from some of the panelists shortly. And I also want to say that particularly, I haven't mentioned yet that it's also very, very important in terms of gender equity, because there is also a gender digital divide. And we do see, and Andy's done some work around this, we've seen that through acceleration services when offered to male entrepreneurs and women entrepreneurs, that the female entrepreneurs, even though they're going through the same acceleration program, do not come out as far ahead as the male entrepreneurs do. And we've been sort of doing a deep dive around that. And there's multiple reasons. It's complex around that, but there's definitely unconscious bias. And that's something that we have to be aware of also in digital, is, as we begin to use these large data sets, we can be not only overcoming bias, but we can also be introducing new bias if we're not careful. But we did see during the pandemic that when we pivoted to online, some women entrepreneurs were actually better able to access online classes than they would be able to do with in-person classes, because perhaps they're running their business part-time and wouldn't be able to take the time out to, maybe it's because of childcare duties or for some other reason, wouldn't be able to take the time out to go and attend a full day session in person, but they are able, as long as they've got access to the internet, they are able to access digital tools online, sort of at a time when they can do it themselves, perhaps in the evening. So there are different mechanisms and ways that we can address this, but there is definitely still a gender digital divide in addition to the overall digital divide. So part of overcoming that is also helping us with achieving Sustainable Development Goal 5 on gender equity.
Absolutely right. And we often say also in the accelerator that we exacerbate existing inequalities that exist. And you see things like mis and disinformation, lack of trust and eroding trust in the public sector, and in some cases also the private sector. I know there's a question in the chat box around corruption and due diligence and the role of SMEs in helping manage, corruption. But the online world oftentimes mirrors, unfortunately, the very the things that we struggle with, whether it's racism, marginalization, lack of accessibility of social services or services in general. I don't want to take from the amazing, robust conversation that I know is coming. So maybe, Rashenda, I will thank you for this amazing and thought-provoking fireside chat conversation and hand the reins over to you to take this forward and really help us understand and unpack the entrepreneurial ecosystem as it relates to a lot of what we were talking about. So without further ado, I am going to pass over the hat to you, and Rashenda, please take us away.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And I will just end by saying also that ANDE does have a digitalization program. And so if you are a nonprofit or if you are an intermediary that's helping to support entrepreneurs and you're listening in, then go to andeglobal.org, because we have some resources available. We actually have a digitalization handbook for business development service providers and a digital assessment tool available. And I'm sure that there are resources available through our panelists as well. So without further ado, I want to introduce our panel. Carmen Correa is the CEO of Pro Mujer, which is a long-standing nonprofit that's been operating across much of Latin America for many years. And Carmen has a distinguished career based in different parts of the world, in Uruguay with Endeavor, and in other parts of the world with the Inter-American Development Bank and elsewhere. You can read her very impressive bio on the slide. Welcome, Carmen.
Thank you very much, Rashenda.
And Juan Navarrete is the Vice President of Fundación Capital, and also has a very deep background in financial inclusion, and also has a deep experience across much of Latin America, and he will be talking about their work on digital inclusion and public-private partnerships. So welcome, Juan.
Thank you.
And Juan Carlos is listed here as the head of entrepreneurship, but I will say he's the vice president at TechnoServe. He recently had a promotion, and welcome, Juan Carlos. TechnoServe, I will say, was a founding member of ANDE, and they're really working across many countries around the world on a range of different entrepreneurship initiatives, and also has been very involved in ANDE over the last many years. So welcome, Juan Carlos, as well.
Thank you, Rashenda, for the invite.
And so for all of you, really want to just kick off the conversation. You've heard a little bit through the fireside chat, but in terms of your own experience, in terms of your countries and contexts, what do you see as being some of the key issues around digital equity and digital inclusion? And what is the long-term consequence of not having digital small and growing businesses in your ecosystems, in your sectors? And if you just unmute and just when you'd like to speak. So Juan, maybe you'd like to kick off as you're unmuted.
Sure. I think that it's not a matter of choice, actually, to be digital today. The economies are digital. And for small and growing business and micro and small entrepreneurs, it really is a must. I think that integrating into value chains is through digital channels. You talked about access to finance. You talked earlier about access to acceleration, to capacity building, to all sorts of services that are needed to survive and to thrive in the economy. So it's not just a nice to have, but a must. And as we saw during the pandemic, most small and growing businesses needed to pivot overnight and start using digital channels. Otherwise, they would not simply survive. So I believe that the consequences can be enormous if we do not keep doing the efforts to digitalize small and growing businesses.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. We need to understand the magnitude of the transformations we see in digital marketplace. And I think that we have to be very well aware that artificial intelligence is evolving at a very rapid pace. We are advancing on robotics. We are actually seeing 3D printing that where you can produce human organs. So we are truly achieving an incredible thing and an incredible advancement. But however, this progress also has not been equitable. And as it was stated before, on the contrary, digital divides are accentuating historical inequalities. So what we have seen, especially in Latin America, is that we have a very big barrier right now with the digitalization. So there is a clear negative impact on productivity in Latin America, despite representing actually 95.5% of businesses in the region, small and growing business generating only 25% of the GDP, while in Europe, for example, they produce 56%. So I think the answer is clear. The digital divide among small and growing businesses, as you were stating, Richenda, in Latin America puts them at a competitive disadvantage, decreases their operating actually efficiencies, and makes them much less resilient to crisis. So we have to be very well aware that, of course, this is going on, this is happening. We are in innovation is happening, but we have to be very well aware on how we don't leave anybody behind, because the barriers are much bigger right now.
Thanks. And Juan Carlos, from a global perspective, what are you seeing some of the challenges globally? And we'll come on to some of the solutions in the next round.
Yeah, look, I mean, I could endorse more what Juan and Carmen just said. Funny enough, in 2017, we presented a study in partnership with the Goizueta Business School that demonstrated, well before COVID, how important was the adoption of these digital technologies for SGBs. Where the study reflected that companies that incorporated technologies in their businesses were way more productive, more effective. They grew faster. Imagine fast forward 5 years later after COVID, how if we run the same study again, how that will look like. So now it's a matter of survival, and it's a matter of a lot of opportunity as well. So that's one quick reflection. The second one I would say is tech can mean many different things in different contexts. So it's easy to get blinded by the latest technology, artificial intelligence, blockchains, and so on. And that may make sense in many cases, but in others, it may be something as simple as WhatsApp. So during COVID, we saw we supported many business models transition into the new way of doing businesses. And I remember I'm from Chile originally. A small business we supported in Concepcion that almost went into bankruptcy because they provided in-person education on languages to people in Concepcion. Of course, they couldn't host people in the room anymore. But by incorporating an online learning platform, they managed to grow their business actually by providing training digitally. On the other side of the world, in Vietnam, an entrepreneur selling food in the streets basically created a WhatsApp group, something as simple as that, and saw his business growing by saying digitally, as you will call it. So it's very important to acknowledge that technology may be something different in different contexts, and not to get in love with the latest and the greatest, but with what makes sense in the particular context. Last thing I will say is also consider that the gap may be different for different entrepreneurs, and it's very important to have that into consideration and meet people where they are. Before COVID, we used to classify our programs by target segments of entrepreneurs, looking at where they were in the stage of the business cycle or how much growth potential they have or things like that. Nowadays, we need to consider where they are in their digital journey, because it can make a very important difference in the growth prospect and their needs for support. So I hope that helped complement the great thoughts of my colleagues here, Juan and Carmen.
Yes, I would like to very briefly complement with some macroeconomic data about the potential to untap with digitization. In Mexico, for example, we would be adding 65 billion to the economy fully digitized. From a micro perspective, we have been working with a universe of over 65,000 micro and small entrepreneurs in Colombia, Peru, and Mexico. And we have observed that those entrepreneurs that successfully adopted digital payments tools, for example, substantially increased their sales on a monthly basis and the survival rate. So we have statistically significant evidence that the untapped potential of digitization is enormous.
No, that's great for pointing that out. It's always helpful to bring that data. And Carmen, specifically to you, because ProMujer really is working a lot with marginalized women. How do you see the gender digital divide in your community, and how are you seeing whether the impacts of that on the communities that you work with, and then maybe you can start to talk about some of the solutions that you are seeing in terms of how you're supporting the women entrepreneurs.
Yes, of course. And basically, I don't want to sound very negative, but the reality is that it is critical to remember that the digital divide is closely tied to gender inequality. So the digital divide in Latin America most significantly impacts women, according even to the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. There is a gap in the percentage of women and men who reported being internet users and who own a mobile phone. And this disparity increases when it comes, for example, to women living in rural areas, making them the least connected people or group in Latin America. So we have to be very well aware of this. The digital divide between men and women is seen around the world, not only in Latin America itself. To mention just one example, for example, women and girls are 25% likely than men to have sufficient knowledge and digital skills. So, and to leverage actually the digital technology for basic purposes. So we have to take this into consideration. And yes, although the democratization of new technology has the potential to offer solutions actually that will have an ongoing impact on the future of Latin America, we urgently need to include a gender perspective across the entire spectrum of our initiatives. Otherwise, we will keep leaving women, especially behind accessing the technology. We will all benefit if we succeed in closing this divide. And basically from ProMujer, what we have learned, actually, we put in place different strategies that they have very good results. The first one is education. We need to support education. We need to train for leaders, especially of small and medium and growing businesses. And we need to provide them with the tools they need to transform their businesses and to stay competitive. This can also include everything from using the digital tools, very basic knowledge on how to use those digital tools, to manage, for example, e-commerce platforms and also artificial intelligence. Also, we need to establish networks that allow small and growing businesses to connect them with experts in technology, digital marketing, e-commerce, and other related fields for guidance, and also advice is essential. And we also believe that it is fundamental and highly encouraging
So we'll come back to Carmen. We're having a little bit of internet, a digital challenge through internet. But coming to Juan Carlos and Juan, maybe you could say a little bit more about some of the work that you've been doing through your organizations to support small and growing businesses, and are they wanting this kind of support? Are they asking for it? And sort of what programming have you seen that is most applicable and successful in the areas that you work?
Sorry, I wasn't muting. Yes, I think that the targeted populations that we work with have been very open. The process of digitization is not binary. It's not whether you are digitized or not digitized. There really is a very wide spectrum of elements there in the quality and in the depth of digitization. In the context of our own work, we have always mixed the tech and the touch. So we don't only work through digital channels, but we also go and have face-to-face interaction. Of course, during the pandemic, it was more difficult and it was different. But we believe that, especially for those businesses that are at the bottom of the income pyramid, it is crucial to create trust in the digital ecosystem. Therefore, to the extent that you can really integrate creatively the tech with the touch, you can really approach different segments of businesses and really cater to very different needs in this process of digitization. For us, it's always a matter of really diagnosing in the very first place the segment, the type of business that we are working with, the constraints and the challenges in terms of capacities to navigate digital ecosystems, attitudes towards digital ecosystems, because there's also some effort that needs to be done in terms of changing behaviors towards how businesses can see digital ecosystems. There's some processes of self-exclusion. Sometimes businesses, especially women-led businesses, do not necessarily have the confidence to say, okay, I am going to start working with this digital payments tool, or really going into social networks to do my marketing via social networks. So approaching businesses in very different ways and creative ways, mixing the tech and the touch, has been very effective to us.
Great, thank you. We've got some great questions coming in from the audience. So maybe Juan Carlos, as you talk a little bit about your experience as well, could you say a little bit more about the types of businesses that you were supporting through TechnoServe? Because one of the questions is, are ANDE supported entrepreneurs or through our members at the stage of managing shareholder agreements and equity? And I think the answer is in some contexts, yes. And in others, others are supporting very early stage enterprises. So maybe you could just say a little bit more about the types of businesses that you are supporting as well through TechnoServe. If you can unmute. If the host could unmute you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It seems to be a little problem. We cannot unmute ourselves, or at least I can't unmute myself. But yeah, Richenda. So a little bit of what TechnoServe does. On the entrepreneurship side of things, we support small growing businesses across around 25 countries in Latin America, in Africa, and in India. And we some of our programs are targeting different segments, from the tiny businesses that may be a self-employment opportunity to one person, to more sophisticated ones that may receive private equity investments. Of course, for those more advanced, the level of governance and the level of their profile allows for receiving equity. For the tiniest ones, it's not something that they could afford, and probably private equity investment wouldn't be the best source of funding for them anyway. So happy to dig more onto that if useful. But would love to compliment on the great lessons learned that Juan just mentioned on our journey to support entrepreneurs digitally. And I think it's important to keep in mind that as we discuss, different segments may be at a different stage in their journey, and to keep that in mind. As Juan mentioned. Also, I think understanding that we as ESOs can use technology for different purposes. We could use technology to increase scales, to reach the unreachable. For example, I know Carmen has mentioned the challenges of the digital divide between men and women. But also there are some opportunities, as you, Richenda, mentioned before. We have seen that women can women that have some basic access to technology can be benefited if we use that technology smartly, because they could better balance the different tasks that they carry out between running the business, taking care of the kids, and things like that. So it comes with challenge, which I agree with Carmen, but also comes with important opportunities. Technology can help us lower the cost and improve program effectiveness, cost effectiveness. So it's good to keep in mind why you're using technology as an ESO, and design for that.
And I was going to come to that one, Carlos, and maybe Carmen, we can bring you back in on this one, and I hope you can unmute as well. What about your own journey as an entrepreneur support organization? How have you seen your own work develop and your own digitalization journey? And one of the questions that has come up as well, which is more about the transparency, and we all think of transparency as being useful. But it can create challenges as well if you're actually showing through the digital work that in fact there are issues, governance issues perhaps in the local society. Certainly we've seen I know issues with data revealing things that perhaps people would rather not be known. So Carmen, how have you been seeing that in your own journey at ProMujer?
Yeah, thank you very much, Richenda. And I'm sorry, I'm in Brazil and the connectivity here is not very stable, but it is critical to as an organization, be adapting also ourselves. It is critical to design tailor-made solutions. Actually, we did recognize that not are the same. We look very much into the we were able to deploy actually different our digital platform that offers dynamic and straightforward content for each stage of the entrepreneurial journey. But it has sectionality perspective is key, is fundamental. We have to be very well aware that Latin America is a multicultural region and actually is home of multicultural ethnic groups, and it's very complex and diverse, political, social, economic. So we have to design programs that actually we need to adapt depending the region or where you want to be implementing the same. For example, in the southeast of Mexico and in Central America, the platform Emprende Pro Mujer, it was adapted into an hybrid program. So because we understood that digital education or those digital skills were not there yet to be able to use the platform itself. So we needed to put in place what we call asesoras and supporters that actually go into the community, and the first thing they do is to teach on the use of the digital devices, digital tools to access the platform. So we need to keep adapting ourselves, and of course we need also to advocate with the authorities, in some cases to secure internet connectivity, in some cases to work with them in how to bring together different group of people and beneficiaries that can actually access in a much more easiest way the technology and access the educational programs, because education for us is key, and it's something that we are pushing very much forward to.
Great, thank you. And Juan, maybe you could say a little bit more about your own journey at Fundación Capital as well in this area.
Yes, I think that, and going back to this question about the institutional resistance to digitization, it can be there. You know, most of the businesses we work with in Latin America are in the informal sector. So a lot of them may be afraid that being more digital translates into being more visible to the tax authorities, for example. But to me, it is very much a matter of giving information to the businesses and really having a dialogue with the businesses in terms of ensuring that they know what are the pros and cons of being digital, and the return on investment of digitization is probably much higher than the tax that they might be paying if they eventually become formal. So I think it's a matter of communication, information, and also capacities for them to be able to navigate digital ecosystems safely and have digital journeys where trust is there on a permanent basis. If there is no trust in digital ecosystems, it's going to be impossible to really ensure that there is an appropriation of digital tools and a continuous use of digital channels from the micro and small entrepreneurs that we work with. So we have created chatbots to really have this continuous communication with the businesses. We know that there might be some capacities to build that can actually be sorted out through chatbots, very simple and very practical capacities. All sorts of tips and informational content is sometimes more relevant and more impactful than thinking in overcomplicated capacity building programs, right? So we always mix communication with capacity building in platforms. But I think it's really a matter of being absolutely open and transparent about the implications of being digital, the implications of being informal versus the prospect of becoming formal. You know, it's a matter of growth, of development.
That's great, thank you. And when you mentioned chatbots, you know, I think that's super interesting. During the pandemic, we actually heard about one of our members in Nigeria who was working with farmers who did not have smartphones, but they adapted their curriculum content to a text base, because the farmers could receive text even though they didn't have smartphones, and they were able to deliver the content via text to train the farming entrepreneurs. So you've got a very high-tech solution in the chatbot, you know, very much up to the minute, and then also just a very low-tech solution. So digital, you know, can mean many things, and clearly, you know, we have ways to do it in a way that meets where the digital journey is of the people that they're working with. So Juan Carlos, we've just got a couple of minutes remaining, but do you have any favorite success stories? You mentioned a couple of entrepreneurs earlier, but anything else that really shows what you think is the power of digital, both for TechnoServe and for the entrepreneurs that you're working with?
Yeah, look, I think to be honest, we were slowly adopting technology before COVID, and when COVID hit, we started doing it with a lot of care, because we thought many things we could do, we were used to do in person, will never been able to translate it to the digital world. When COVID hit, we had no choice, and we were forced to move into technology, and we had to do it overnight. But with a lot of experimentation and care and co-creation among our teams around the world, I'm very proud on how we managed to create an offering that helped many of our entrepreneurs become resilient during the pandemic, and create growth. I mean, resilience. When you look at the stats of people that managed to keep their business alive, it was truly impressive, and also how some of them pivot and managed to grow their businesses. So I'm very encouraged by the power of using technology. And by the potential that it has. Now we're in a journey where we're thinking on how we incorporate those lessons learned and come up with new models, of new operational models. So, for example, basically we keep having a team based in, we have a team based in Nairobi training micro retailers through a digital application that you can use in the smartphone. We do it because basically we brought digital technology into a program that was designed to be delivered in the real world. But now the possibilities, I mean, there's no reason why this team couldn't be training micro retailers all across Anglophone Africa. So I'm very excited about the possibilities of incorporating those lessons learned into what can be a new model of operation for us. Same thing for the entrepreneurs in the cases we mentioned before, this business that had to pivot into an online training model, or a tiny business that started selling food through a WhatsApp group. So plenty of success cases, both for TechnoServe and for entrepreneurs.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. And I will say on a final note as well that we're all here today from different parts of the world thanks to digital. And even if the internet isn't perfect, I think that says that we still got some way to go. But as a network, ANDE was only able to operate through COVID because we were all able to pivot digitally as a network as well. So I think for us as a network, it's so important also to be able to talk with all of you through through Zoom and through other channels as well. So without further ado, I want to say thank you very much to Carmen, to Juan, and to Juan Carlos for all your insights. If we haven't answered your question, then please feel free to contact the Digital Equity Accelerator or contact Andy afterwards, and we'd be happy to try and make sure that we can answer your question. So a big thank you again to all our panelists, and I will pass it back over to Hazami.
Thank you very much for such a robust and fruitful conversation. I think it's very clear that we have a lot to discuss, both with all the, all the people on here, but in general, this is a conversation that is on the forefront of a lot of people's minds. And I encourage you all, I know that there's a lot of folks who posted questions around the work that you're doing. I do encourage you to start advocating for this at a global scale, because as Rashenda and all the panelists spoke to, this requires capital. It requires changing and shifting the structures that exist around access to finance, access to opportunity. There was questions around digital literacy and digital skills, and there are a lot of resources out there, but we really want to center the importance of digital inclusion in conversations that have to do with social and economic development across the board, not just keep the digital inclusion conversation separate and it's in its own little silo, because it does not live there. As you've heard through this conversation, it impacts every part of our larger global development ecosystem. So with that, I would like to thank Rashenda and the panelists for joining us, and very, very fruitful conversation. Please do stay in touch. And for our audience that is interested in additional events, we do have one final conversation as part of this thought leadership series that will take place during the UN General Assembly, online also on technology and the SDGs. So please be on the lookout for the announcement for that. And we invite all of you to attend our 2023 Accelerating Digital Equity Global Summit that will take place the 17th to the 19th of October. Please do sign up for more information on our website. And if you would like additional information on ANDE or any of the work that we're doing, we encourage you to go to both websites, look us up, look up the Aspen Institute and the programming that we're doing across the board. There's a lot of additional opportunities for engagement. And with that, thank you all very much again, and please join me in virtually giving a round of applause to our panelists, and Rashenda, obviously, for not only your thought leadership, but also the work that you're doing to enable a lot of the entrepreneurial ecosystem to thrive and grow around the world. So thank you again to everybody for attending, and we hope to see you again and stay in touch.